Hello, TOEFL students. In order to get the biggest benefit from this lecture, please visit my blog, which I will link in the description below. However, if you do not wish to visit my blog, you can simply listen to this lecture and answer the questions below. I will also put a link to my blog in the description. Now listen to a lecture in a literature class. Today we're going to talk about the famous poem The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. When it was first published in 1845, Poe had no idea that hundreds of years after his death, it was destined to become an American classic. His poetry gained little popularity during his lifetime, but The Raven was an exception. It did gain a lot of attention and acclaim among his contemporaries. The poem is told by a first-person narrator, a man who lives alone. The poem includes a supernatural talking raven, a giant black bird, who visits the man who is alone in his chambers at night. The poem begins when the man, sitting alone reading, hears a knock on his window, and he opens it to find a raven. This raven flies into his room and sits on a sculpture that he has just above his doorway. As the man continually asks the bird its name, it simply repeats, "Nevermore." As the man struggles to get answers from the bird about his lost love Lenore or about the afterlife, the bird simply repeats the same word. In the end, the man is left alone with only the company of the raven, and the constant shadow of the raven casting him into darkness and, we can assume, madness. The raven itself is a symbol of grief and loss. The narrator has recently lost his love, the woman he named Lenore. The poem does not explain how the loss came about, but we can assume she has passed away, as the man asks the raven about the afterlife several times. To write the poem, Poe may have been inspired by ravens of ancient mythology and folklore. In Norse mythology, the god Odin owned two ravens that represented thought and memory. In Hebrew folklore, Noah sends a white raven to check if land is nearby while commanding his ark. The raven does not return immediately with news of land and is punished by being turned black and forced to eat rotten meat for the rest of its life. Or perhaps Poe was inspired by Ovid's story, Metamorphosis, in which a raven is born white before the god Apollo punishes it by turning it black for bringing Apollo the news of his lover's betrayal. Whatever story influenced Poe's poetry, we may never know. And despite some initial criticism of the poem, it has been repeated, illustrated, and parodied hundreds of times. The Raven is now one of the most well-known popular poems in the world. I suggest you read it if you have never read it. It's personally one of my favorite pieces of contemporary American writing.